I have a question.
Sure.
For like the few people that use Islam as a justification to commit like acts of terrorism or anything, how is it they go about using Islam as a justification? Do they just misinterpret the meanings, or like how is it that they even use Islam as a justification?
Right. So it's essentially taking things out of context. So as I mentioned, in Islam there was, Islam came with a message, and it was fiercely resisted. And at first the Muslims was actually almost pacifist with regards to it, but then at a certain point enough was enough and action had to be taken. And then if you now go ahead and take the verses that are pertaining to these particular actions, when the Quran is talking about how you should deal with an event where someone is attacking you and how you should attack back and don't sit back and be fierce in your resistance, and you try to generalize those to any condition without others being physically attacking you, or without observing the same warrior code that was installed by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his followers at the time. This included, by the way, never attacking non-combatants, which is a far cry away from what is being done today, and sadly, in the name of Islam. This included preserving and respecting places of worship and people of worship, and that's why in Jerusalem we have intact the churches of the Nativity and all the synagogues and the churches that were present at the time. So there are these two elements that they neglect. One of them is the warrior code, and the second one of them is the justification for you to go to war.
Do you believe that all of the paths lead to the same place?
Good question. I don't. I know some very well-meaning people do, and I think, but I know some other people who, from different faiths. I've had discussions with rabbis and with priests, and we think it's actually even more respectful when you say it's not necessarily the case that they all lead to the same place. Because if they all lead to the same place, then there is really no point in arguing. I mean, everything is good, everybody will go to heaven, and that's the end of the story. But when you look at the teachings of each religion, you find that each religion is making it clear that there is something, that this is the right path. And if you're asking people to discount this part of the religion, they're not going to be happy about it. But the thing is, you don't have to do that. You can tell people you could still have the strong conviction that Islam is the only way, or that Jesus is the only way, or that Judaism is the right way, or whatever you have. But just have the courtesy of acknowledging that others have the same strong conviction that you have.
All right, the third question is, what is the ultimate goal of Islam?
The Prophet himself actually once answered that. So he said, the only reason I was sent forth is to perfect the character of humans. So the ultimate goal of Islam from that point of view is for all of us to have as good a character as we can have, dealing with one another and with our relation to God. Now this is a very compact answer, because then it includes many things. What do you exactly mean by dealing with others kindly? What do you exactly mean by dealing with God in the right way? But that's kind of the answer in a nutshell. And it's, the linguistic structure that he used was making it clear that everything can be encapsulated in that. Perhaps a more elaborate answer would be that Muslims believe that in the hereafter there is a heaven, and that in this heaven you have the pleasure of the proximity of God, so much so to the extent of seeing God, which is described as the highest pleasure ever. So this is what Muslims strive for. But in order to reach that, they have to go through these tests of characters, these perfections of character.
Okay. Is it true that underneath it all, Muslims do not like everyone who isn't Muslim? Because they believe that Islam is the only true religion?
Well, it's a tricky question. So yes, Muslims believe Islam is the true religion, just as Christians believe that Christianity is the only true religion. Just like Mormons believe Mormonism is the only true religion. There is nothing wrong with that. This is, in the Quran, God repeatedly says that if God had willed, he would have made all humanity one nation. He could have created us all following the same religion, perhaps having the same colors, the same shapes, the same tongues. But He hasn't. He created us different. and there is a wisdom behind it, so that we get to know one another and interact with one another. So no, we don't think of other people as being necessarily inferior. They just have a different faith. Yes, we do think that this is the one true faith, and that's why we invite people to have a look at it. But if you don't have a look at it, then it's not for me to judge you. It's for God to judge you. Okay? And just as Christians would believe the same thing about me, and I wouldn't be offended if they do that. If they say, well, you know, I respect you as a person, but God will judge you in the hereafter for the fact that you rejected the faith in Jesus and chose to believe other things. You know, that's perfectly fair. That's a reality that we have to live with.
What book other than the Quran can you recommend to read?
Well, there are two answers to this. Actually, fortunately, a good friend and student of mine alerted me to that question on my way here, so I came here prepared. On the one hand, one might be interested in looking at a more in-depth, or you know, not necessarily in-depth, but an overview of the history of Islam in more details than just the glimpses that I mentioned. And for this, I recommend this really nice little book by Houston Smith called Islam: A Concise Introduction. Okay, so it kind of covers the history of Islam. But on the other hand, what I would really recommend, although it's kind of pricey nowadays, it's kind of went out of print and Amazon is charging $50 for it. It's a book called Purification of the Heart by an author named Hamza Yusuf. So it's called Purification. And so this will not give you a history of Islam per se. It will not tell you this happened at the year 635 AD and so on and so forth. But it will give you an understanding of how Muslims try to practice the religion. You know, if the previous question about the ultimate goal, and when I talked about the perfection of character, this is a book about precisely that.
Yes, we're approaching $4 a gallon, and there's so many forces that are controlling our lives, manipulating our lives for economics. Could you give a short, and I know you don't have much time, explanation of the Islamic economic system? Because a lot of people don't understand that Islam has a free enterprise system that is not capitalistic, nor is it socialistic, nor is it communistic. It's a unique economic system. And so you might want to explain why people may be interested in keeping that economic understanding of Islam economics hidden. And it's not theory. It ruled a great part of the world for almost 1,000 years.
Right. Yeah, that's a very deep question, and it could take us ages and a lot of preparation to answer it. But you know, let me mention a few points on that. So in essence, Islam is not just a religion, but it also regulates a lot of the things relating, let's say, to the economic sphere in particular. And it shares a lot with the American system, if you may, a lot with free enterprise and so on. But it also has it has a very different credit system. Essentially, there shouldn't be lending with interest in that system, and people shouldn't be lending money without having things to cover it. And if you followed at all the recent recession fears and stock market near collapse and so on, you'll see the dangers of that. The thing with the home mortgages and everything going around. It's precisely a pitfall of people borrowing money without really having any idea of how they're going to pay it back. Now, I would mention that this when the system was in place in the right way, because any system is subject to misinterpretation and manipulation and so on. But there was a time where this system was in place rightly, and the nation became so wealthy to the extent that it's not exactly a tax, but it's a charitable contribution that people have to pay in Islam. Then when it was collected, there weren't enough poor people to receive it. So they went back to the leader and they asked him, well, what should we do with it? And he told them, well, find the people who have debts, business debts or so on, and pay it for them. They did. There were still some left over. They told him, what should we do next? He told them, you should go and find people who want to marry but don't have the means and get them married. And they did. And so